themselves. Maybe start from this side and go down.
Hey, the Cuyahoga County Jail Coalition as well. I've been organized juvenile justice system and went through the juvenile prison system as well, and then the adult system. That just kind of led me to what I do now. You know, drives me to and yeah. So you know, we just came off this beautiful campaign as a coalition, and it's a wonderful thing. But beyond that, you know, I'm an organizer, I'm an artist, organizer as well.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kareem Hinton. I'm an organizer with Black Lives Matter Cleveland that are addressing the inhumane conditions and the way in which they run the Cuyahoga County Jail, which is called the Cuyahoga County Jail Coalition, that Kevin just mentioned. And yeah, I'm formerly incarcerated as well, and hence my drive to give back to the community that I feel that I've taken a lot from. And I appreciate it.
Yes, my name is Latanya Goldsby. I'm the president and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Cleveland. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm also a member of the Jail Coalition, along with these other folks, as well as a member of the family. My organizing in the city of Cleveland, but also knowing that there needed to be a structure where folks like me could gather, meet in safety, and reimagine what policing looks like in our community. And that led to the work around our consent decree, and we'll get more into that conversation.
Hello everyone, my name is Chrissy Stonebreaker Martinez. My primary role, my family is from Colombia, and there's been at least 4-generation long civil war, the longest civil war in this hemisphere, fueled greatly by security funding from the United States government. And I was birthed into struggle because of a result of being part of that diaspora and colonization for the last 400 years. My family is embedded descendant from what's currently known as Colombia. And our entry point into the carceral system and being an abolitionist against police, against prisons, and against militarism of all forms, of course the wars plural, really stems from the US training and funding of counterinsurgents in Central America. 2 women from Cleveland were killed in El Salvador in 1980, Jean Donovan and Dorothy Kazel. The reason why you know, we want to internationalize our struggle, but global Jail Coalition, and you can use they, them pronouns for me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here today. To begin our discussion, I think answer the question of what is issue 24? What does it do? What is included in the issue?
So issue 24 is launched by families that were directly impacted by police violence. Myself, Samaria Rice, the mother of Tamir Rice, Alicia Kirkman, the mother of Angelo Miller, and Brenda Bickerstaff, who was the sister of Craig Bickerstaff, who were all murdered by Cleveland police. We began that work in 2015 when the DOJ came in and found that the Cleveland Police Department had a pattern of practice and a history of using excessive force and violating constitutional rights of citizens and residents in the city of Cleveland. They came in, and as a result of them coming in, Cleveland, the Department of Justice, and the Cleveland Division of Police entered into a consent decree. Our consent decree was to last for 4 years, but it has now been extended for extra 2 years because they have not been compliant with the recommendations and things that have come out of the consent decree. So we knew that in in order for us to really sustain police accountability within our city, that we had, so there were 3 structures already in place. One is the Office of Professional Standards, which is where complaints against police brutality comes to their office. And then that second level is the Civilian Police Review Board, where those established out of our consent decree as a mandate. We knew that before our consent decree ended, we wanted to make those bodies a permanent structure of our governance in the city of Cleveland. So we, the families started to meet with community organizers within the community to have a conversation of what policing looked like in our community. We had already sustained multiple, there were still lives that were being taken by police state-sanctioned murder. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a level of accountability in our community that was led by the citizens that were directly impacted. And so we decided that we wanted to keep our community police commission, which was and then also maintaining the energy, the motivation, and the conversation around reimagining policing until our general election, which was the end of November 2021. And so having those continued conversations about what it would look like in Cleveland to have police accountability as on a civilian level, and those folks having the final say over police accountability and police discipline. And so we went in to change the powers of our community police commission, which gave them subpoena power, the power to investigate police. Because prior to that, they only could make recommendations, and their recommendations would go to our safety director or our chief of police, and oftentimes they were discarded. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a voice that was advocating from the community. First round of petitions, signatures kind of fell short by about signatures. So we had to get back out in the community and garner some more signatures, but we submitted a total of 15,000 signatures. Folks wanted to see within this commission.
Thank you so much for that. So the idea of community policing and sort of policing the police is definitely not a new idea. Talk about initiating like this sort of idea in American policing.
I think the conversation itself has always been prevalent in our communities. It's just being able to mobilize and really educate the folks on why it's important was part of the work that we did. And I would say that it's a continued conversation that our ancestors and our parents before us have always had, but not really having the proper things in place to be able to bring those things to fruition. And so I think we've already always had those conversations in our community. They've never ever disappeared.
You might read or hear folks talking about people coming from the outside agitating our community, and that was a card that they tried to play. They tried to play that, for example, with the unrest that unfolded after the George Floyd protests. One of the things I always said was, content, well-treated people cannot be provoked into acting out in anger the way we saw after the George Floyd protests. With regards to, so in other words, don't blame it on outside agitators. During this campaign, one of the ways in which they tried to put it out there was, hey, we've got these folks that aren't even from Cleveland trying to pass this stuff. And what they didn't understand is, or no, I won't say they didn't understand it. They were very misleading and intentionally misleading. What was not being conveyed intentionally was the fact that, as Latanya stated, these are things that folks have wanted for a very long time, but we just did not have the means to achieve it because these campaigns take money. So understand, coming from a grassroots perspective, how you're at a deficit. These campaigns take a lot of collaboration, and not just collaboration of the grassroots activists or advocates, but it takes folks who have friends down in Columbus. It takes folks who know folks in other agencies that are not normally involved in this work, and by people in the legal profession who require money for their services. And so bringing about this coalition, folks, that means bigger organizations, so like bringing in folks like that into the picture, and other organizations.
ACLU matters.
NAACP.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So by bringing in these folks, what we did was we diversified and broadened the amount of influence, and we also broadened the amount of perhaps assistance we were able to bring in. That was the difference maker than, say, just us as a small group of grassroots organizations coming out with that, but by getting with the folks, right? Impacted people. We never relinquished control of that, and that was a prerequisite. That was mandatory. They agreed. They said, we just want to make this happen with you. And that's how we were able to accomplish it. But I just wanted to put that in, that the biggest reason this was successful was because of the collaborative effort that was well funded, and that was a big part of the strategy.
That you mentioned did a sort of history of 100 years of policing in Cleveland. And we know that this is not a new struggle, the struggle to change policing. Many of us are on this panel are abolitionists, and we dream of a better world, of a different world that we know is possible. And at the same time, we are interested in successfully obtaining real material relief for our directly impacted communities in the here and now. And so, folks decades ago, and he mentions in his books that was his greatest regret, was not being able to change it in the ways that he had hoped. We know that policing started as slave patrol in this country. Policing has always been used to protect property and the elite, and to serve the elite. And so that's something that we're interested in dismantling. I think Kareem probably has a lot more history that he could share if he's willing.
Hello. I would just go back about policing, particularly in Cleveland. I would just bring up, the Glenville Riots, and it was the Glenville Riots. It was Mayor Stokes who said, I'm going to put a stop to this, this killing that's happening. And so he had mandated that all white law enforcement officers cease from patrolling Glenville, the area of unrest. And in doing so, they've been killed. Earlier in that, you had members of a group of who they refer to as black nationalists, but these black community members, they were murdered. And that's the way they put it. But we know the ways of policing was the reason why all this jumped off that it did. It was, police, what happened to Fred Hampton? They had checklists of people to become the FBI. But, so they had these lists and these people that were on their hit list. And some of these folks were on that hit list. And so that's why you really had that fight that had ensued. But back to the point that I'm making is that because those officers were forced out and not allowed to go back in and get revenge, they were upset with the mayor. I mean, that was the mayor who had his house marched upon by angry white residents, and the Cleveland police weren't there to this mayor. But this police union that they formed, the CPPA, was modeled after the BPA, which was the Boston Police Union, the Boston Police Association. And so, I'm sorry, like, it doesn't take a whole lot of imagination. We're talking about Boston. Not a very friendly place for people of color. And that's who they got their marching orders from, or not marching orders, but their instructions on how they need to operate. Because they said, never again. Never again will another black mayor stop us from doing what the heck we want to do. And that's why that is, you know, one of the most powerful police unions there are. And so, you know, we can't, so when we talk about policing, what Christy said is very relevant, and just what it morphed into and how now they're able to lobby and influence things, you know, in politics. Something I witnessed today I'll share, and then I'll get off the mic. But I just wanted to give you a picture of the power. But I want to sitting in court for a charge, and two officers were there to that were, I guess, investigating the case. And before those people had gone up to address, you know, the court, and when those two gentlemen, whose judge made sure they had a high bond, in spite of the arguments made to the contrary, like regarding the fact that they showed up to their own recognizance. And for me, that was like just a picture of influence and power. They didn't come there and say a word. They just showed up. That's influence. That's power. That's the kind of stuff that we're working with here. And so, you know, we talk like, so they're constantly morphing, and their strategies I want to hit you with regarding this police commission. They're currently trying to get folks to apply to be a part of the police commission. And I guess there's not the large number of folks applying. You know why? Because they want to have this influence. They want to escape accountability. They want to muddy the water, and so forth. But, you know, I just bring that up because, like, they're changing, it's morphing, and, you know, we have to change and morph with it, and that's why you had issue 24, because we've been paying attention. We've been keeping score, and as a result, we did this. They weren't ready for it. They thought it was going to be just another thing that the folks try to get done, and they're not going to be able to have a successful campaign. But we had all the right pieces in place, and we made it a reality because we morphed too. And I just want to share that.
Thank you. Kareem, you spoke a little bit about morphine and power, and you addressed the police union. If someone could talk about the role that the police union plays in fostering police violence, and then kind of a two-part question. Now, post issue 24, or currently, if someone wants to address that.
Well, locally, they did everything that they could to push back on issue 24. I mean, they tried, you know, we had yard signs that we would put out that said they were jumping out of police patrol cars and stuff, putting up no on issue 24 signs all over the place. And co-opted the name. Yeah. We were Citizens for a Safer Cleveland. They were
Citizens for a Safe Cleveland.
Yeah. And it was like, wow. So the opposition was heavy. But I think the groundwork and the foundation that we set prior to made the campaign a success, because we started engaging with the community 2 years out of the election cycle and tying that issue back, it's almost like the same margin. And so the influence that we were able to cycle, I think, was very incredible.
I mean, they really tried at the end in the final 2 weeks. I remember, and somebody actually, and so it was pretty comical almost, but to that point, as much as they did try to skew what, nonetheless, like the people's canvassing, when we were at events talking about issue 24, when we were door knocking through the whole city, heavy mobilizing, and where else was I going with that? Yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but I guess I could talk more on that when the time comes. But.
Yeah, absolutely. I have another question for deal with reactionary movements, other individuals, and other orgs that did not like issue 24 and did not want community policing or oversight of police.
I can start. As you may remember or know, Cleveland is a majority Afro-descendant city, and is very, very, very segregated, and that goes back to historical redlining. And there was never people, who have been bought and paid for by different corporations who were tokenized to the way we asked SURJ and used SURJ, so showing up for racial justice.
Yeah, so Cleveland is a very segregated city, east side to west side. East side is the black side, west side, white side. Of course, there's diverse neighborhoods and everything, but that's the gist, right? So where SURJ comes in. SURJ is an organization that focuses on organizing majority white working class communities. Because we know two things, and I guess I don't need to say it. So if we don't, somebody else will, and also there's so much work that needs to be done. So every group, has a specific focus, and also we're not going to rely on we need to talk to our people. White people should be talking amongst our community for these issues that impact everybody and that have a disparity on our communities of color, poor communities, Cleveland, and also a very working class ward. And because we know that this group of poor and working class white people, historically divisions have always been, they've always tried to divide poor working class white people, and we know that group could have potentially stopped issue 24 from passing, right? And we dealt with this when we the strategy, and got a list, got a group of volunteers and everything, and what specific neighborhoods within this section of the city we were going to focus on. And so and we created messaging, of course, and that sometimes had to change because we were talking to people who. So that's where we had to kind of mold our, we're under the impression that issue 24 was going to, get rid of the police. And they were, from that standpoint, let them know that this is going to help weed out the bad police. and help the good police not be labeled. You know, so so I guess to say that, to wrap the question up, we, with the whole campaign, you know, when dealing with white communities that go through the same struggles of poverty and police violence, of course not on the same level, but and who don't, you know, we have our approach with that audience, as well as the group, the middle class white people who have never gone through this. So, you know, making sure that we're just out there having these conversations. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to add that, you know, the fear propaganda that was put out, the unconditional police supporters that no matter what you say, if the police are against it or it's about holding police accountable, they're not for it. And then the other people that were definitely against issue 24 were a lot of politicians, because they had to see happening if you guys took matters in your own hands. Right. But because of your inaction, the people had to take it into their own hands and create something, and they had sour grapes about it because, you know, people with power don't want to give it up. And so that's, and everybody's thinking in terms of, what about when I become mayor? Or, you know, or what about when I am in this particular position of power within the administration? What about me? I'm going to want to have that power, that influence. And there are those within the police union and within certain spheres of influence that said, hey, be against this, because we're going to be helping you during your next election campaign. And so that's all you had that came out against it.
I guess I would add a couple of quick things, if that's okay. I know that there were a lot of, in particular, like social media campaigns against us, in particular in the ward that Kevin's group was organizing within. And we intentionally didn't engage a lot of those debates in favor of knocking doors and having real face-to-face conversations. There were people who were paid. They call us agitators, but there were people who were those community forums the day after the election, the police, all of that stuff. But we know that we need to fund our continue to be important in all of our radicalization and self-development. I listened to the SDS presentation about international police training, and the fact that we give the largest amount of military aid that we give is to Israel. Second largest amounts currently look like Ukraine, Colombia, and Saudi Arabia. And since we know there are some very particular moments in our recent history or recent collective memory that have changed policing in this country as fascism rises around the world. That looks like, you know, fascism, I was once told last year, and I've really resonated with this, so I've been sharing it a lot. Fascism is what imperialism looks like domestically. So these, you know, military tactics have been used around the world, and then they're, you know, tested, experimented in other places, and then brought back to local communities. We know that happened in 9/11 as these debates, if you will, about our right to exist as indigenous peoples from the Americas, on land that was always ours, but where the nation states have created these fictitious borders to cross over not just our lands, but our bodies. We're connected to the land in this way. And so our militarization has increased, and we know that a lot of continues to exist since 1984. We know that one thing that LaTanya and I were working on a lot during in 2020, before and after the uprisings in 2020, was the federalization and militarization of policing. The last presidential administration gave millions of dollars under a couple of different operations, and Cleveland was one of the test sites for these millions of dollars in police federalization, and those were Operation Relentless Pursuit and Operation Legend. And all of the large urban centers, majority BIPOC urban centers that were chosen were included Detroit, these really, really gross histories. And the last thing I'll touch on about well, maybe I'll touch on two more things. The last two things that I'll touch on about how policing has changed and morphed over the last couple of decades. We know, this is very much related to May 4th. I'm an alumna of this institution, and I studied the May 4th massacre and the Jackson State Massacre while I was here. And we know that the National Guard claimed that they were afraid, and we know, and reporting on it or re-sharing articles about it yesterday, we know that the news report intentionally misled the public to believe that National Guard's people had been shot and hurt by, angry radicals or whatever. This is the same tactic that police used with their qualified immunity. They claim credible fear to get out of accountability for killing our friends and family members. And it's not okay. We know that it's not okay. And this happens alongside, I mentioned Operation Relentless Pursuit and Operation Legend. We also know that millions of dollars from the American Rescue Plan Act have been allocated for policing just in our community alone. At least $8 million for facial recognition technology. We know that the New York City Police Department is using robo-dogs, which sounds very dystopian, and I don't want to live in. And we know that one thing that our coalition has been fighting for a long time, a form of technology that has been used, is called ShotSpotter, where police will claim that a weapon has been, discharged, thank you, in a certain location, and that ShotSpotter can, without warrant, spy on conversations in communities. They can go into communities and listen to what's happening around a place where they say that a weapon has been discharged. But most often, you can see reports that came out of from in Chicago in their backyard, that are triggering this technology and then giving police the right to further limit our civil liberties and further surveil us against our privacy.
Yeah, and I would add that those fundings go towards also the purchases. We're getting ready to, our police department is getting ready to implement a drone program where they're going to be in the community. We voted out the speed cameras, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to vote out some more of this AI technology that our police departments are attempting to utilize. We don't want to be terrorized in our own communities where we pay taxes. We want the same freedoms and liberties just as our suburban to live without surveillance. And this is why we push back on programs like the COPS funding program that funded Operation Legend and Operation Relentless Pursuit in our communities. And so teaching folks about this technology and educating them about what it's used for and how invasive it can be, and the fact that your privacy can be invaded without your permission. just really educating the community on what this means if we were to really agree to the purchase of these items. We also encourage participatory budget that we can defund. We don't have to money on these type of technologies.
To add to that, with regards to of that shot technology, law enforcement, what's been going on in Cleveland, law enforcement shows up, if they show up, and they then will look for some shell casings and then maybe pick up someone in the area. 9 times out of the 10, them picking up someone in the area is just a pretext to maybe search them and see if they find anything like, do they have any warrants or anything like that. It shows, but they'll pick you up if you've got a warrant. The reason that they know who to pick up, and this is something that we're only recently finding out, is that back in 2018, the city said they were going to be utilizing smart light technology. This smart light technology was supposed to be a big deal. They could adjust the lights, make them dimmer, make them brighter, and it could monitor.
And it's eco-friendly, Kareem.
Was that they have these ports where basically they're able to hook up the shot spotter technology and facial recognition cameras. So we just found out that they've been utilizing, last week, that they've been utilizing facial recognition around the city of Cleveland. It's not hard for us to figure out where these cameras are because we need only look where the smart lights are. And so these people that are getting arrested, nobody's getting arrested for shooting a gun. They're just getting arrested for so they can see, how useless this is, or how and they just want to spend more money, and how technology for law enforcement. Keep in mind, for a law enforcement agency that's up under a consent decree, means they've been doing a lot of bad things.
2 consent decrees.
2, yes.
Simultaneously.
A law enforcement agency that worthy of the is not regulated. Just think about that. And so that's some of what we're going on through right now. In places like San Francisco, they have what they call Police Technology Bill of Rights. That's something that we're going to be pushing for in Cleveland, where it's going to be, if it has to go up for a vote, we're going to hope to accomplish where if police wish to utilize any new technology, they have to run it by the general public. And they have to ensure that when they do run it by us, that these are going to be meetings that are after 5 o'clock so we can have increased public participation. I just wanted to be able to share that, everyone.
And that also speaks to the importance of having that community police commission in place, because they will now have the power to actually go in and look at that technology and see how the police are using it. And if it's out of compliance with the consent decree or the recommendations in the charter, it can be voted out.
I think to wrap up, it'd be really cool to hear what you have to say, because you've all been talking about the morphing of policing, the insane high levels of surveillance. What should we be working towards? What is what world should we imagine? Can we imagine a world without police? What are the alternatives to police? And then on top of that, does issue 24 go far enough? And what would the next steps look like in trying to achieve the alternatives to policing that you see?
So one of the things that we knew that we wanted to accomplish with this commission is that we knew that the underlying issues in our communities were not being addressed. And that was the causes of crime to go up in our community, things like that. And so we wanted to make sure that this commission had funding to be able to create programs to address those issues. The previous had a budget Now they have that opportunity to address gun violence, to address crime, to address those things that we know create the issues that we see in our community. And so, as Kareem said, we did the job that our elected officials couldn't do because we were tired of waiting. You know, folks were losing their lives every day, and the urgency was now.
Yeah, I second everything Latanya said. And, you know, I like this kind of little phrase. So, deprivation of resources drives depravity of reason, right? And to explain that, like, if you strip resources from anything, any entity, any human, right, people are going to act without reason. And so that explains where trauma came from. But I also want to say that not everything we label as crime should be a crime, right? We know this. We know that people are charged with things. People are charged with, shoplifting when they're just trying to feed their families, when they're trying to feed their children. But to say that there is trauma. Trauma is a very real thing. When we deal with things like gun violence, when we deal with, addiction, and deal with that. And now we can focus on actually trauma and having more, just building that up to, just addressing community needs. And I'll say that that's why organizing is so important, right? As Latanya mentioned, some of those bigger groups, the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, the Policy Matters, the ACLU, that is a lot of the back end work, I guess. But it boils down to organizing in the community. I know is a diverse community in Cleveland, but has a large white population as well, and working class, and because of that, has a large, people are subjected to police violence, and there is a big police presence in a certain part. Some police live there. It's a pretty diverse place, but we know people there struggle with a lot of addiction and all of that. And so, but organizing, making sure that the people in which we could have more, community-led alternatives. We could have more community engagement and things where people don't have to call the police, where we just change the mindset of people feeling like they have to rely on the police for a problem that they don't have to. And that's where, right, and that's also how you capture the very pro-police people. Like, well, let's not burden them. Let's not waste our money and resources on them. And that's why they show up 45 minutes late to a call. And that's how the cycle is continued. So, but I just wanted to really emphasize, like, making sure that the people that are going through it continually are coming up with these resolutions.
I was just going to add that a lot of folks don't think about this, but when we think about crime, and recidivism rates, I want you to think about this. One of the areas that we fail to really delve into is, what about those people who are on parole? So when we talk about, they're law enforcement too. And, what we have to do is, when we talk about reimagining policing, because that's a part of policing, is that there are programs that exist in New York and in Chicago where they've cut down recidivism rates over half. Over half. They've cut down violence in these areas, because in places like Chicago, they took 2,000 people over the course of, I believe, 5 years. So we now have quantifiable data to support it. But we have quantifiable data that shows by having these people have sort of like a counselor, caseworker / mentor that works with them besides the PO, that these people who have been involved in violence are now one third less likely to I wrote it down. 1/3 had been shot at least once. The average had been arrested at least 7 times, and in those areas, shootings were, because they work with this select group of folks, shootings were cut nearly in half, and 20% were less likely to be shot or killed themselves. And for this test case of about 2,000 folks, it cost about $20 million. And some folks might think, man, that's a lot of money. But then you got to get into the cost of what it costs to jail them and house them, you know? So when we start talking about alternatives to policing, these are the things that we need to start looking at so we can cut it off before it starts. Like, yeah, they already committed the crime. You can't stop that. Let's help them stop from reoffending, you know? And so, and that is something that speaks near and dear to me. I'm someone, as a person like Kevin, that's formerly incarcerated. I had the benefit of some great people in my life, and they were not afraid to allow me access to their networks. And so I think that by having people that work along with these POs, I think will be a game changer here locally, and that's actually something of a couple of programs that we're working on that we're hoping to introduce in Cuyahoga County here soon.
I have a few thoughts for this wrap-up question, if that's all right. I wish we would stop being so hypocritical. I think that we are all human. We're all flawed. We are traumatized. Every single one of us, our families in some way have been affected by state violence. And I have to sort of tokenize my trauma frequently to feel like I belong somewhere, or to get my voice heard, or to get someone to give us some sort of empathy or sympathy, and that really sucks. And you know, like, there is a lot of divisiveness in our world, but we know that the actual division is between the owning class and the working class, and that is racialized and that is gendered. We also know that all of these, I don't wish injury or moral injury on anyone, but of course you are going to be negatively affected by the brutality that you push onto other human beings. That includes child and family services, that includes social workers. Anything that separates us as human beings from resources and belonging will result in trauma. And so my favorite tools in my tool belt are mutual aid, and I practice a form of others' burdens together. I wish I could think of this phrase that's ringing around in the back of my head about sharing burdens, but I'll post it on the social media or something. There are other alternatives. There have been times in history where people found ways to live in tune with Mother Earth, with what my people call Abya. And in our community, we've seen in small scale forms, like literal blocks or block clubs, start projects of restorative justice circles, of committing to not calling the cops on each other, of committing to having people within the community who can help resolve conflict in a trauma-informed and victim-centered way. And we know on the global scale that the Zapatistas and Rojava have offered us an alternative to what governance can look like that is decentralized. And that includes communal and regional councils where people get engaged in increasing their budgeting as one form of gaining greater democratic access, because participatory democracy requires participation, and we've never seen a real democracy in this nation state. But we know that these tools, we all deserve greater access to determine our destinies. We're the experts in our own lives. No one else is the expert in your life. So don't give up your voice. We're facing so much right now with the Supreme Court leakage last night, and CRT, and Don't Say Gay, and all of these horrendous pieces of legislation in this state. Do not give up. I came to Kent to find people like you, like SDS. Don't give up, and don't give up your voice, because when you do, then they're just going to take away more from us.
Thank you. I think now we can open the floor to any questions from the audience. Any questions for any of the panelists?
Well, someone who I told you before, I really, now that you won this important victory, and I understand, I read about what you said, Latanya, that the numbers in terms of the voting for the referendum and for the new mayor were very similar. They seem to go together. So my question is, given what you said, and at worst, how evil it can be, as city governments are around our country, what are you going to do, or how much faith do you have that this referendum and like discipline over police by civilians, will that come to fruition and not allow it to happen, perhaps? Or, you know what I'm trying to get at? So that's my question.
So with issue 24, it is now law. It is in our charter. It cannot be removed unless there is an amendment to the city charter. And
Which requires another vote.
Which requires another vote and another election. So it is law. What we're doing now is we're now accepting applications to fill that admission. So the mayor has opened the application process, and it's open to the community. As long as you're a resident in the city of Cleveland, you can apply. We have added criterias for the application, and some of those criterias is based off of what we heard from the community. We wanted representation from the LGBTQ community. We wanted representation from someone who was formerly incarcerated but exonerated for a crime that they did not commit, because ultimately they were arrested by the police and violence. So there are several criteria that we have in place now to make sure that this is a diverse commission and not just folks that are appointed by law enforcement, as Kareem was speaking to earlier. And we have a selection committee that's going to review all those applications, and they'll choose from those applications that were submitted.
I'm sorry, so those things are written into the law?
They are a part of our city charter.
I kind of want to answer that question too as well. So from what we saw, the structure that we did on the ground of passing issue 24, like the people came through. And I think moving forward with all the things that we mentioned about where we want to go from here and the alternatives we want to, the resources we want to see the community have, I think following that same structure, the organizers in Cleveland working right now, I think that the people won't let that be stopped. And I really have faith in the city of Cleveland with this one. And from our canvassing scripts to having house parties in the community where neighbors come together and discuss these things. So I think that it was so beautiful to see the city come together, and I think that
the report that came out during our studies looked at policing in Cleveland from 1922. And so I think this time we got it right.
And next we're going to be not moving on, but focusing on making sure that our county does not build a $550+ million new jail on a toxic wasteland while trying to increase bed capacity, which we know from immigrant detention numbers, if there are beds, they will fill them. And so that is a part of our next struggle.
And not taxing the poor to make it.
Right.
Idris?
So, Chrissy, that's like the thing, though. All the shithole.
Amen.
Okay? Because here's the problem. I mean, we talked about Carl Stokes 50+ years ago. We got people like Frank Jackson now, who was running lockstep with the police union and doing everything that he could to shut down the work that his very community has elected him to do. I mean, how do we, and this goes to what Kareem was talking about too, in terms of just the politicians at every step. I mean, when we look at the way that city police department has tried to ram Timothy Loman down our throats for the past 6 years, we have years, right, is what makes people go nuts in Glenville, and what makes people go nuts in Huff, and what makes us go crazy when we're out there in Cleveland and we have to watch the way that we're treated in our own communities. How do we end up shifting this culture where those people who are elected, who are supposedly our representatives, have nothing to do with what we want nor our interests?
Yeah, we need to create a culture of care, and it's going to be really hard. And as I said before, I slut out my trauma, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it.
And then simultaneously disregard them and, like, you know, just not care.
We know that there are no permanent friends or permanent enemies as with regard to politicians. We committed to being comrades, to speak out. I think frequently. I know there are times when I don't feel safe saying the things that I know I should and want to say. But care looks like struggling with each other as we work for very urgent change. Like, it looks like not disrespecting women and queer people and trans folks of color and talking over them in so many spaces, talking down to us in so many. It looks like remembering that we're human, right? And that we can have conflict and not go nuclear, right? And I think for us, we chose to. I'm not a fan of electoralism. That's where I'm at right now. I haven't given up my vote yet because I don't know. I'm traumatized, but we did choose to support BID because anyone who wasn't calling.
Finding folks within the community, within the grassroots community that are interested in running for office. We were able to not only elect a new mayor, but we elected 5 new council members to our city council board. Folks that came from the community, organizing community, who really knew what the issues were and were adamant about taking to city council and have.
They need to be held accountable too.
Absolutely.
Even if they're our friends. Like we cannot hold any of revolutionary. We're here for the masses. You know, we need to be checked in loving ways just as much as
kind of bring it together. It's two things: accountability, and it's connected from the very community that they're supposed to represent. And so, one, the accountability comes in where, you know, we're going to expose you if you're not doing the right thing, and there's a chance that there's going to be some resistance to you being reelected. Not just saying, hey, this is what we need done. Here's how you can fix it. Giving them that, you then solutions that they need, and they take heed to it. Then they deserve the wrath that you unleash upon them. But it's if you want to change things, you change the culture with accountability, and you have to participate in this finding the solution. And I think, and you know, which means that we have to act just like lobbyists. Lobbyists come in, they have everything written up, they present it to our legislators. We have to do that same thing because politicians in many or most cases are lazy. So
Well, that's why that networking that you were talking about earlier in terms of working with those larger groups, right, that may not be as grassroots oriented, but have those connections in Columbus and other areas is so critical.
So, and like I said, and just be complaining about the problem.
Time for one more question.
No, I grew up on the east side, and from a very young age, I learned that the cops are essentially murderous thugs roaming the streets. When I was young, if I was like playing in the creek behind my house, if I happened to slip into someone else's property, and someone calls the cops, well, the cops come and like, you know, give me a hard time about it. So I'm like, I'm playing in the creek. But anyway, the point is, so basically, you know, and then in 2020, when I went to the first George Floyd where they started using tear gas on us after we did nothing to provoke them, it reaffirmed my belief. But I just wanted to get any of your takes on arming the workers to defend themselves from these thugs. They do no-knock warrants and stuff, and that's why people have guns sometimes, because it's scary. You know, these are, they have like this immunity too. If they kill you, they can usually get away with it. So I guess I just wanted to hear what people's takes were on community defense and you know, people defending themselves in that regard.
I think that this was alluded to earlier on this side of the table. It was really beautiful. The people who actually commit the crimes against you, the people who commit the most violence, who maintain a monopoly, is the state. I am definitely not going to be disparaging any tactic of any person who has been disenfranchised, who has been deprived of resources, who has been traumatized, unheard, unlistened to. And I also recognize the state we live in as well. So I always go everywhere that arms could be on someone in some place. And so we know that there's a class of people who maintain this monopoly, and that happens in this state as well. And that's all I'll say for now.
I'm just going to add that, you know, coming from some of the earlier principles that, you know, so many of us embrace that come from the early Black Panthers movement, you know, which was, you know, basically take care of your own community. When you take care of your own community, policing your own community, what you have effectively been able to do was take away from the power of law enforcement. Because every time you call law enforcement, you're giving away power. You're telling them, come in here, handle this. But by not calling them and handling what needs to be handled within your community, developing that community trust, developing that community agreement, you can keep them out of your community for the large part, or for the most part, and you can handle things yourself. And so guess what? When you have a community, they're going to be sworn. What are you doing here? What's going on? We're acknowledging our rights to be here. We're acknowledging our rights to bear arms. We're going to observe you. That's a game changer. So, you know, me personally, I welcome the opportunity to organize and to live in such a community where we take back our power rather than relinquishing it the way that we've been trained to do.
Thank you so much.
Love you guys.
I can speak for everyone that we all gained so much from hearing all of these panelists speak today, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come here and spread your knowledge to all of us. So, thank you.
Yeah, it's like a